Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Jan Weiner with us. Jan is a CFP. He's also the owner of Bespoke Wealth Solutions. We're going to speak about tax planning, charitable giving, financial freedom and planning, investment strategies today. This pod is brought to you by podfire.com. If you want to start your own podcast, scale it and monetize it, go to podfire.com. Jan, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and about BWS.
Thanks, Charles. Happy to be here. So, like you said, I'm a financial planner. But before you tune away, I do more than just the investments and the insurance stuff, which is what I think we should talk about today, which is really interesting. I'm a wine enthusiast as well, so I enjoy a little bit of wine and where those things kind of mix. But really, what I want to talk about is how the needs of consumers are changing and what's important and interesting to folks right now. And really, that's tax planning and that's charitable planning. And so what I really help folks do is think about wealth differently than just money. There's a great quote from a guy named Carl Richards. He's a famous sketch artist and financial planner. And he says that wealth is your time, your energy, your money, and your attention. And so what we're finding is if that's true, and I think that it is, and those are finite resources, they can be spent well or they can be spent poorly. And so being thoughtful about that and ordering your affairs to make sure that you can maximize spending those well is really important. And so that's what I think we should discuss a little bit today.
Right, because usually I find wealth management quite boring, like everyone's about the same strategy and it's like, oh, have your money grow. But for odd people like me, we can grow money like twofolds in like a day, right? I mean, I'm not talking like in millions, but probably in 5 to 6 figures. So, just waiting for something to grow is kind of boring. I guess it gets less boring the more fortunate you are, but what would be like alternative mindsets and mental models that you could tell us to actually grow or money in a less boring way?
So I think, a lot of folks that I work with are, business owners or real estate investors. And so that's a similar world, right? They might have some exposure to financial markets, but they're more focused on either building their business or building their real estate portfolio. And those are different issues, right? But I think what's important to start to consider when that's your world, that's what you focus on, is there's this tendency that people have to have a number in their head that they're trying to get to, and everything works towards that number. The question is, okay, then what? What is the number going to get bigger? And if you were already at that number, would you be spending your time the same way that you are now? And some people love building and doing those things. That's the way I am. But how do we make money meaningful? How do we pair, wealth with meaning? Because that's different for everybody. And then we get into, okay, if you want to pass that on, whether that's to charities or to kids or to, organizations that you care about, how do we do that in a thoughtful way? So beyond just like, mutual funds, stocks and bonds, okay, yeah, you hit all the records, you broke all the records. Okay, now what? That's the stuff that I think really challenges people. And I don't think people think about very much, okay, we added an extra zero. Is your life going to change?
Not much. Like, wealth is not like the best factor for happiness. If people are optimizing for that, maybe they're optimizing for the next generations, but even that, like what is telling you that giving that money to your kids is gonna make them happy and successful? Philanthropy, sure, yeah, that can be fun. Me, I'd be like, why not start my own philanthropy or start a social startup that will impact the world immediately, Also, another weird thing, me, I don't have any plans of dying right now with all the longevity technology that's available to us. So paradigms are shifting, and think a lot of folks, they try to build their wealth the way their parents did, or, a mentor that's 30 to 40 years old. But I feel that the world is shifting so quick nowadays with AGI and ChatGPT that, yeah, most of these wealth strategies will just evaporate with time. What do you think about that?
I think there are things that are somewhat like universal truth right, that are gonna stay. But a lot of the tools and a lot of the strategies that worked for the last 50, 100 years, I think you're exactly right. They're gonna change. And I love what you brought up. You know, you said, okay, philanthropy, but I want to do that in my own way. And I think that's what we're starting to see more and more. The younger generations are more as charitably inclined, if not more charitably inclined than the previous generations, but it looks different the way that they're thinking about this and the way that they're giving, right? And so what I'm trying to help folks think about is, you know, let's think about charitable giving less as like, you know, giving to, you know, whatever the organization is, and more about strategic investment, right? That's really the thing. And how do we, you know, whether it's an individual or a family, how do you use the rules that are in place to use philanthropy as a strategic investment? And when you look at that in your portfolio, it changes everything, you know, because everyone has issues or missions that they care about, that they're passionate about, right? I mean, you know, everyone has tons of different ones. I love art, I love wine, you know, I want to see those things shared more and more. Well, at least in the US, I mean, that there's very flexible rules around charities that support those things, you know, and so all we got to do is play by the rules. But to me, that's a way to invest money that is not a traditional sense, but that can really power forward meaning in your world, you know. And so I think that's interesting, and even like the structuring of that and avoiding taxes, I think is really important too, you know, because my belief is every single American has a moral or ethical obligation. I know this is strong, to pay as little tax as legally possible. You know, pick your issue of you know, inefficiency in government, right? But really, I think you can spend your money more efficiently than they can. And so, you know, we can only control what we can control, but if we're using philanthropy as a strategic investment, we can control a lot and minimize taxes. So why not do it?
Right. Yeah, it's sort of controversial. I mean, yeah, they can funnel that money into causes that they do believe in, but aren't they like citizens of that country? Aren't they using the roads and, you know, like a bunch of rich people, they also use the health system, surprisingly enough, and they do falter back on the government in many scenarios. What do you think about that?
You know, I can't speak to every country, right? But at least in the U.S., you know, the primary way that we can save on taxes by, you know, using philanthropy as a strategic investment is income taxes. And so typically what that's used to fund is not things like the road or the schools. You know, that stuff is funded by other taxes. And so I don't have a problem with it. Those are somewhat voluntary taxes as I see it, right? And I'm not anti-tax, but I would rather be efficient with capital. And I think the federal government understands that. That's why charitable planning is so flexible. Those rules are flexible enough because they understand they can't do everything at a small scale in every little local area, right? And so that's left to those charitable organizations or private foundations, what have you. And so to me, it's simply a matter of, okay, how can we control more of what we can, and you know, push forward the agendas legally that we care about, and have control over that.
Right. I love alternative investments, like odd investment sources, you know,
Mhm.
like, and I'd love to learn more about these. For example, you're into wine. Gary V was
Mhm.
too. Is it a good source of investment? Because these things, they age, there's counterfeit as well. Um, what are what are some sources of alternative investments out there that are extremely exciting? And tell us more about wine.
So I am interested in wine as an alternative investment. There are some challenges with it that you mentioned. Storage is one, counterfeiting is one. These are things that can be managed, right? And when you think about wine, you know, there's built-in supply and demand that is just part of the equation, which I think makes sense. People that understand economics understand why that makes sense. One of the challenges from a tax perspective is that it's taxed as a collectible unless you own it in a, you know, tax advantaged account. And so collectible taxes are pretty high. 28% is where they come in. And so, you know, that can be kind of a trade-off there. But I mean, you can absolutely see double-digit returns in some, some rare and expensive wines. And so that's something where, I have a partner who's a master som that if someone's interested in that, she can help curate that. And she has reputable contacts that will, that we can almost go to the source in a lot of cases. So we can facilitate that, right? But, one of the things we want to think about is ultimately what is the purpose of that? We don't want to have too much allocation in something like that because, pardon the turn of phrase, it's not very liquid, right? That's one of the challenges. Another one I'm interested in is actually whiskey barrels. I don't know if you've looked into this much, but especially Scotch whiskey barrels, and these are pretty regulated securities, but Scotch whiskey is a huge export of the UK. It makes up a huge amount of their tax base. But the actual people that are making the whiskey and the islands itself is relatively poor. And so, the whole function of Scotch is, in a lot of cases, the longer it ages, the more valuable it is. But we have some really delayed cash flow there. And so typically what happens is, they will produce the Scotch in Scotland. It has to be aged in oak for 3 years in Scotland in a warehouse. And so, as soon as it is able to be called Scotch, they'll sell those barrels to pay for the next runs, right? And so investors come in and they will purchase those barrels, hold them in bonded warehouses for 15, 20 years, and then turn around and sell those to be bottled. And that can be interesting and attractive as well. So those are also things that I'm personally interested from a consumption perspective. So those are fun alternative investments. I think real estate is always an interesting play, right? But I'm a huge proponent of small businesses and family businesses. I think that is, for people that have the tolerance for that, is the best way to create wealth and best way to find meaning in that too. Build your own thing that you care about. I think that's powerful. And it's hard to, for a lot of the business owners that I work with, investing in the market, yeah, we might make 10%. Okay. But, if they reinvest that dollar into their business, like you said, that could be 50, 60% in a year. So it's hard to move away from that. But those are just some things that are kind of interesting to me right now.
I read some of your case studies. It's quite interesting what you did for some of your clients. Like, what are their demographics and psychographics usually?
So this is an area that I'm working on, frankly. I don't have a very well-defined niche because I don't want to be, there's that old saying, if you're a hammer, everything you see is a nail. And so I don't want to be so specialized that I can't see outside of that. So I would say I work with a third of folks who are retired, a third folks who are business owners. They tend to be younger. And then a third folks who are families that want to pass on wealth through multiple generations. And the reason I kind of break it up that way is because some of the challenges are the same, but some of them are different. And so I want to be able to take insight from working with one group and apply it to another group, right? And so that's something that's really important to me. But what they all share is that they understand that time is their most valuable resource, and it's not efficient to try to learn everything and do everything themselves. And so what I help them do is build a team of professionals, accountants, tax people, bankers, investment people, insurance people, and then I manage that team for them. So what they do is they focus on what they enjoy, living their life and spending their time well, and they know that other stuff is handled. And so that approach of having an entire team that works for that family, but they have one main point of contact, which is me, saves time and gives them the best possible advice, because those people don't work for me. They're not going to be yes men to me, and tell me whatever I want to hear. They're going to have competing good ideas. And so really it's just a matter of, okay, people that the thing that brings them together is they want to use their time well, and they want to be efficient as possible with taxes and passing on money. And those are big challenges. I don't know that people realize how hard that is. 90% of wealth is lost by the third generation. This is like, internationally, this is a problem. And so it's like, okay, you've built wealth, you've built a company, maybe you had an exit, you sold it. Odds are 9-1 against you that it's going to make it to your grandkids. That to me is a problem worth solving, and so
It's
that's what we try to focus on.
it's like okay, granddaddy worked so hard to have like this setup, right? To create the wealth in first place, then to have it set up, to have it managed a proper way, and the younger gens, they just fuck it up. Why is that
Yes.
happening? It's like lack of education, or they're just spenders more than they are earners. Is it like a mindset in life? You're like either a spender or earner. Like, how does that work?
There, there are a number of different things that can cause it. So, mindset is one. The education is another. So you hit that on the head. Um, just poor lifestyle choices is another one. Imagine you're 18 and you get handed, $4 million in cash. Odds are that's not going to go well, you know?
Yeah.
And so the other one is really just things are not structured properly. There's not good planning done on the first generation. And this stuff is hard. It's not fun to talk about this stuff and deal with this, right? And so, it's hard enough to talk about it. It's another thing to actually do it. So what we do is we have to build a governance system for the family. And so the family operates kind of like a corporation. And so we have a vision, mission, values that have to be passed down through those generations. And if they're educated, they have the governance structure and they are bought into the vision, the values, the mission. What's the purpose of money for our family? If they're bought into that, that really has a lot better outcomes. And so that's what we're really working on right now, is trying to bring that message to people, but also take that approach. And the hardest part about it, and this is deeply challenging, if we're investing for 100 years, we're not going to know if we're successful. And that's kind of crazy when you think about it. We can know that we're successful if we build the framework in the way that we're comfortable with. That's all we can evaluate at that point, though. We won't know if the kids are going to squander because we'll be gone. I mean, that's a tough problem, you know?
Yeah, things change so much in 100 years, but it just I would never like hand down like any money to my kids. I think so. Like I would teach them how to make that money very young, you know. I even want to
Yep.
start my own school at well in 5 years from now, because we're about to have kids, and teach them entrepreneurship from day one. At 12,
Yep.
they'd be independent of fortune. They'd have their little e-commerce making shitloads of money, and they would learn the value of money. Maybe I'd fund some ads, you know, maybe I would borrow money here and there to inject in the growth of their own little business, but I would put them in the market as soon as possible, because it's quite dramatic, the effect of, yeah, fueling 4 million to an 18-year-old that never made a cent in its fucking life. And I mean,
Yeah.
I
It's a
can only
terrible idea.
picture myself, you know, with that kind of money back then. I was a heavy drinker. I was destructive, you know, like it wouldn't have ended up well. And I also thought, you know, that's a great opportunity for someone that's in the luxury business, for example, or running clubs. That's
Yep.
probably how they make their money, right? They just 18 years old, ordering 4 bottles of Clico a night, you know, just to prove that there's something. But yeah, that's evil.
Yep.
What do you think about
It's true.
educating kids at that age?
So I think that is huge. And what you talk about is part of that value system transfer, right? And so what ends up becoming interesting is, that the older generation, as you get older and your kids grow and then their kids come around, the relationship you have with your kids is different than the one you have as a grandparent, right? And so the role as the patriarch of the family, changes over time. So with your kids, it's like building that discipline and being able to support them, right? And go, hey, look, this is why we do these things this way. And maybe give them a little loan if they have a well-prepared business plan and coach them through that, but and to discipline them. But as a grandparent, it's a different thing. It's really like passing that value and so we look at those roles over time differently. And of course, we've got to build a lot of structure into this. I mean, we there's never a situation where we want just access to tons of cash, right? I mean, just like you said, it's crazy. It doesn't make sense. But if we're thoughtful about it, from a tax perspective, we can do a lot of different stuff with, tax advantaged accounts with kids that are able to earn income as they grow, and that money can grow tax free. That can be invested in family businesses, that kind of stuff we can do. But, like you're talking about, focusing on the structure of how you interact with them rather than just a default of giving them money or paying for everything is huge to make sure that they make better decisions later on.
Yeah, and that's why I would need, yeah, a guy like you also. I mean, if I die, right? Like, or just someone to keep the vision alive. So I can see the product market fit here. What do you have on your radar for this year? What are your top 3 priorities?
So we're really trying to talk to folks about estate taxes right now. That's a really big issue. So there's a law that went into place in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that increased the estate tax limit dramatically. And it's going to sunset. The law is going to stop in 2026. So there's a number of tax issues that are involved in that. But right now, the estate tax limit is 13 million. It's probably going to get cut in half to 5-6 million. And the previous really 30 years, the average was about 1 million. And so for folks who, have really any level of wealth, this could be disastrous. I mean, this is one of the biggest things that stops it from getting to the third generation is the estate tax is 40% in the US. That's just the federal level right off the top. And let's say you have, let's say it's a $10 million estate, $5 million is taxable. Okay, 40%, I mean, that's a lot of money to come up with, especially if you have illiquid assets. And how do we solve that problem? And so there are people who have been kind of asleep at the wheel for the last 5 years because the limit has been so high. It might never be as high as it is now. And so we're trying to help people get stuff structured right to make sure that 40% doesn't immediately go to taxes. That's before, if it's a real estate portfolio, you got to sell it if the market's down. I mean, that could evaporate a fortune quickly. So that's a big priority. The other one that we're really wanting to talk about is just this concept of passing generational wealth, and that it's more than just assets. That's the easy part. It's that vision, value system, that building that structure to educate folks. So I would say those are the big ones that to me is the biggest problems that we need to solve in the next couple of years.
Love it, Jan. Where can we find out more about you?
So my website right now is justretireNow.com. I'm doing a lot of rebranding, but that'll still kind of redirect. I'm on Twitter at IanWeiner90. That's where I share a lot of my thoughts and more personal stuff about me, frankly, and some wine stuff. Or you can email Ian at JustRetireNow, and we can chat.